Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane. I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library in Massachusetts, and I'm here with Becky Diamond, who's going to be talking about her book, all about the Gilded Age Cookbook, which, oh my gosh, it's amazing. Things that you could only imagine yourself eating at the holidays, and people did it on a regular basis. Before we get started, I want to say thanks to the Friends of the Ashland Public Library for supporting all of our programs. We couldn't do it without them. I'd also like to thank Becky for letting us share this program with other libraries because, of course, when libraries work together, we make magic. You can buy signed books by Becky from Aesop's Fable, my favorite local indie bookstore, and I'll put a link to that in the chat, or maybe just send it out in the recap email. And oh, where was I going with this? I was so excited about the food. I forgot what I was talking about. We are going to, Becky has slides, as you can see. I will be turning the chat off during her slides. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A, which is a button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and I'll ask those questions of Becky at the end. Her slides go for about an hour, so we're going to stay until about 8:15 to make sure we get through some questions. So welcome, Becky. I'm so excited you're here. I know you're kind of a foodie and a historian and like this amazing person who just puts these thoughts together, things that we're so excited about. Tell us all about this book and about yourself and how this all came about and why this excites you.
Sure. So, welcome everyone. I'm so thrilled to be here. And I love the fact that it's being shared across many libraries because I am a librarian myself. So, it just is totally kind of full circle for me to always help out a library community. So, I guess we can just get started now with the presentation, correct? And I'll
Absolutely.
talk a little bit about myself in the beginning too. But just so this first slide, so everyone can see here, is actually from Lyndhurst Mansion in Tarrytown, New York. They so generously let us come in and take photographs last year, right around this time, actually. They were starting to decorate for Christmas. So you'll see several of the photographs in my presentation as well as in the book being from Tarrytown's lovely Lyndhurst Mansion. So let's get started. So yeah, just a little bit about myself. As I mentioned, I'm a librarian and also a food writer and researcher and just historian in general. I've been writing about food since about 2010. My first book is Mrs. Goodfellow, The Story of America's First Cooking School. And I learned about her through reading a cooking magazine. And I thought, wow, I was from the Philadelphia area my whole life, and I never heard about this woman who had this amazing cooking school. And it just really piqued my interest in this intersection of food and history, especially the 19th century time frame, because her school was in force in the early 1800s in Philadelphia. And then when I did, after I wrote that book, I found out about the $1,000 dinner, which was an 1851 culinary duel between New York and Philadelphia. It was 17 courses that took place over 12 hours. So 30 gentlemen met up in Philadelphia, and it was 6 o'clock at night, and they didn't leave till 6 in the morning. So the book talks about all these courses that were paired with wines and just how it all came about. Just so fascinating. And so I started blogging about a lot of the recipes so that I could deconstruct them and really learn more about the foods that they were, including in all of these historic references that I was reading. And I learned that the Gilded Age TV show was coming out. So I thought, this is just perfect timing. I'm going to put all these recipes together into the Gilded Age Cookbook. So that was 2 years ago. And I had several that I had researched that really touched on the holidays. And I thought, that this is perfect too, kind of as a companion to the Gilded Age Cookbook to then do the Gilded Age Christmas Cookbook, which, as you'll see in my presentation, also has a little bit of information about Hanukkah as well as New Year's, kind of this winter holidays in general. And then at some point, I'd like to do a Gilded Age tea book. That would kind of be a little trilogy if, at some point that's my plan to do that. But let's get started in just kind of the Gilded Age in general, in terms of, how the holidays were depicted. So we all mostly know this quote from Clement Clarke Moore's famous poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, that really made the term sugar plums famous. But yet today, few Americans really know what sugar plums are or have even tasted them. So it was once a really popular Gilded Age holiday treat, but they've kind of faded from tradition in the modern times. So today I'm going to talk about them and some of these other confections that may not really be around as much anymore. But then there's also some treats that we still really enjoy today. So in both cases, we can revive some and then talk about some that are favorites. So I like to always start about kind of defining the Gilded Age. And, it was a term coined by Mark Twain. He wrote the novel, The Gilded Age. And it wasn't necessarily an endearing term because it meant, he was referring to the fact that things were gilded on the surface, but underneath there was this kind of layer of corruption. And it was really fueled by some of the greed of these captains of industry, whether it's the railroads or steel industry or any number of other kind of booming businesses that were really happening at the time. And there was no income tax, so that kind of contributed to it. Things weren't regulated, including food. There was no FDA yet. And so people were just getting richer and richer, but yet there was other people living in tenement housing and just not having as much money and kind of, contributing to, helping propel these advances forward. But what I like to say for the most part is it was really a time of innovation and technology. And that's the biggest takeaway. And that includes with food and a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today. So that's, to me, think about that, about the innovations and all the technology that came about. So, again, Mark Twain, he's always going to be tied to the Gilded Age because of his novel from 1873. But he also left his mark on the Christmas season through his writings. He's very satirical in the way he wrote, using humor and satire. And he really, wanted to reflect the era's acceptance of corruption and excess. So he wrote this, one of his early works was The Christmas Fireside. And he talks about it in that book or in that story. And then he also would say things like, oh, it's just such a hectic time of year. He mocked the stress of gift giving and, just the whole kind of craziness of the time frame. But he also embraced the holidays warmth. So his home in Hartford, Connecticut, he really enjoyed decorating that with his wife and daughters. They would put up, hang up Christmas stockings, put up a Christmas tree, different greenery throughout the house. They would sing Christmas carols by the piano. And then sometimes he would even put on a Santa suit for his daughter. So even though he wrote about it, kind of mockingly, he really did enjoy that holiday season as well and embraced the festivities of the season and good cheer. So, and one of the things that I really it was fascinating in doing the research for this book was that so many things that we celebrate today or we associate with Christmas today really have touchstones to the Gilded Age. Like things were becoming mainstream then. So you had the idea of giving Christmas presents, Santa Claus, the Christmas tree, Christmas, sending Christmas cards. All of these things have ties to the Gilded Age. And this really stemmed from the fact that people from all over the world, like all different cultures, were coming to America. And so you had this influx of immigrants from places like Germany and Scandinavia, Eastern Europe, England, all different places that were bringing their traditions with them. And it all just kind of came together. And, you might see your neighbor putting up a Christmas tree, say, I want to do that too. And, children started hanging up stockings and there were different parties and themed events and all of those things. So, and then of course the baking of holiday treats, which we'll talk about too in a little bit. So let's start with Santa Claus. So really, it was this time frame when the image of Santa, as we know him today, his fur trimmed suit, pack of toys. He's, being pulled by his reindeer in a sleigh, living at the North Pole. All of this became central to, different American Christmas celebrations. And we have Thomas Nast to thank for a lot of that. So he was an illustrator for Harper's Weekly, and he created the series of prints of Santa Claus from 1863 to about 1886. And initially, he drew him as this small elf-like figure, as you can see in the picture on the right. He's so small he can fit in a stocking. But then eventually, he settled on this image of more of a life-size, portly old man with a long white beard and a pipe. And this is the portrayal that really captured the public's imagination and solidified the iconic image that we know today. And he also established the North Pole as Santa's home. And this was inspired by Clement Clarke Moore's poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, too, which, even though that was written in 1822, Nast was really, referring to that poem in a lot of the ways he was drawing Santa Claus. So, a figure dressed all in fur, implying that he came from a cold climate. And so by the Gilded Age, you really start to see this image of the chubby, red-cheeked Santa Claus, and, with all his toys, and really firmly embodied in American Christmas lore. And now the tradition of hanging stockings to receive presents, that was another thing that came up at this time. And it really stemmed from St. Nicholas's Day, which was December 6th. So in parts of Europe, children would leave out their shoes the night before on December 5th in hopes that St. Nicholas would bring little treats, leave them behind in their shoes. So like little candies and nuts and fruits and things like that. And then eventually stockings replaced the shoes. And then when the Protestant Reformation came about, that shifted the gift giving to Christmas time, because the idea was the Christ child was bringing the gifts. And so they called and often it was a girl figure, actually. They would say Kris Kindle, that's where Kris Kringle comes from. So that's who was leaving the treats. And so then Christmas Eve would be the time you would leave out your stocking. And then by the Gilded Age, you see them hung on the fireplace, as shown in this picture here. And originally, they were more of a plain kind of stocking, like it was your actual stocking. So nothing really fancy, and not very large in size either. But then eventually, the stockings got larger and larger so that you could put more and more gifts in there, and fancier too. And nowadays, you see so many fancy versions of Christmas stockings. And now the Christmas tree, which is often, it's a staple in most homes that celebrate Christmas here in America, also dates back to Central and Northern Europe, even before Christianity. The Teuton and Saxon people really revered trees, thinking of them as housing gods, including Burka, which was a spirit who cared for babies. So they decorated these trees. They would put like lights and tassels, wreaths on them to honor these gods. And then Germans later adopted the tradition of decorating trees with treats and gifts left inside their homes during Christmas. So they would put the trees inside then. And then during the Victorian era, when Queen Victoria married Prince Albert from Germany, people would see them putting up a tree inside their home, and then it just really spread throughout Europe and into over here to America too. So by the Gilded Age, you would see American homes, they would put up a tree, and there was like different shiny glass ornaments, homemade decorations, maybe some fruits and nuts on there, strings of popcorn and cranberries. And then something else you see on these trees is actual candles. So yes, they would put candles on the trees, and they would often have somebody on standby with a bucket of water in case any of the branches would light up. Which you can imagine. I'm sure that happened, often. So, some of these trees, if it was, say, like 6 feet tall, it could have up to 50 candles on it. And a 12 feet tall tree could have even up to 400 candles. So just a crazy amount. I don't even know how they lit them all up. It must have taken a while just to even, light them all. Oops. Now, and I always like to talk about the White House. So it was in 1889 that the first tree was put up inside the White House, and that was President Benjamin Harrison. And he really wanted to do this for his grandchildren. He had his grandson Ben Harrison McGee and his baby sister Mary. They really loved seeing this Christmas tree all lit up. They lit the candles on the tree between 4 and 5 p.m. on Christmas Day, and the children's friends could come and see it in all its glory. And then just 2 years later, in 1891, electric lights were installed inside the White House. But President and Mrs. Harrison were afraid of this innovative new technology, and they refused to use the switches for fear of a shock. So they were okay with candles on the trees, but not this new electricity. So that would have to wait till 1894. And that's when Grover Cleveland was in his second non consecutive term. And he and his young wife, Frances Folsom, who, fun fact, is still the youngest first lady ever. She was only 21 when they got married. But they embraced this new technology, and they replaced the candles with red, white, and blue electric lights on their tree. And before they had dinner, they had a luncheon that was served to children of cabinet members. And so everyone could see this tree with all the lights on it. And then after the guests left, the president dined with his family, and they feasted on fresh duck that he had hunted himself in South Carolina. So that was their Christmas dinner. Now, during the Gilded Age, just like today, people like to decorate their houses. And women had plenty of guidance on how to do this from plenty of women's magazines. There was Godey's Ladies Book, Ladies Home Journal, Good Housekeeping. They all had different kind of advice columns on how to decorate. A lot of Christmas greenery. You can see, like, even you could shop for it, like the picture on the left there. A lot of times they would do holly, boughs of holly. Mistletoe was popular, maybe some ground berries, even a Yule log was popular. So all different ways that you could decorate your house with these different greeneries, and also some color too, as you can see from the berries there. And now Christmas cards are another fun talking point, because even though they originated in the 1840s in England, by the Gilded Age, they were really coming into their own. And you see people sending them, and they often featured fancy designs, much like Valentine's cards were. So if you think of kind of like a Victorian Valentine's Day card, that's how the Christmas cards were, very fancy and ornate like that. The one shown here is one of the earlier ones. It's a little bit plainer. But by like 1875, there was this German printing entrepreneur. His name was Louis Prong, and he even had a contest annually where he would give out prizes for first, second, and third best designs of Christmas cards. And his judging panel included Louis Tiffany. So that was a pretty high bar that he set there for his Christmas card contest. And now Christmas shopping, just like today, newspapers and magazines really urged shoppers to start early, both early in the morning and then early in the season too, to avoid crowded stores. And they often published gift guides for, which were tied to different advertisers. It was hectic. Like this photo is Christmas shoppers on 6th Avenue in New York City in the early 1900s. But if you wanted to kind of skip the chaos of shopping out in public, you could do catalog shopping. That had emerged as a new option. So you had Montgomery Ward, Sears Roebuck, and even specialized retailers like jewelers offered Christmas deals with installment payments, free returns, really making shopping more convenient than ever. So we think of it kind of as a modern thing, but it goes back to this time frame. I'm just going to take a drink really quick. Oh, excuse me. So now I want to talk about some of the Gilded Age specific events that would happen around the holidays. So there were debutante parties, and you can see the young ladies here dressed in white. So these are coming out parties. So these ladies are making their debut into society. And they could be, maybe they would do a Christmas tea or some kind of dinner, and even do some kind of event in the evening. So it could be a multi-layered kind of day for these, debutantes, or it could be maybe just one event. You could do it at a restaurant somewhere, or have a dance or something. And they were common during Christmas week too, because a lot of the young men were home from college for like the holiday break. So it was a perfect chance for some of these ladies to introduce their daughters to all these young suitors. So it was really a good, connection to have. And now I also like to mention that during the Gilded Age, Black society had its own aristocracy. So it was a cultured and educated elite class with social exclusivity similar to that of the white community. And the Christmas season was particularly busy time. There was numerous dances, balls, cotillions, sponsored by these exclusive social clubs. They also had what they called at homes and receptions that were held in private residences. So you get social events in many of the large cities. Baltimore is shown here. Philadelphia were especially abundant. New York too, and Pittsburgh. There was the Home Social Club in Albany, New York. That was known for its yearly Christmas dinner dance. And then in Philadelphia, the Crescent Club also had an annual Christmas ball. And people would come from all over, even as far as Washington and New York City. So it's just, I like to mention that, and I'm glad that the Gilded Age TV show is showing that aspect of society in their programming. Now, tea parties were also very popular in cities like New York, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Washington, D.C. And many of them were annual events. People would have them in their private homes, tied to the Christmas season. But others were affiliated with clubs or groups. There was all different social clubs. You think of almost any activity, and there was a club associated with it, whether it's a book club, even bicycling was, started to become very popular. And then others were billed as charitable events. There were Christmas teas given to certain schools so that maybe orphans or children who weren't going to get a lot of gifts could have some festivities and, a really good meal and then some little gifts. So that was another popular thing that they often did at the time. And now we're going to talk about the holiday food. So I hope everyone has a little sweet or treat or something next to them they can nibble on. So just like today, too, cookie baking began weeks before Christmas. And many of the cookies, the recipes yielded dozens of cookies in a single batch. And this was because they were used in a number of different situations. So they would they would use them as decorations where they would put them in windows and people could, when they were walking by, could see them. They would put them in Christmas stockings like you see here. They would just have them on hand when people would come over, to socialize. There was another it was a thing called bell snickling, which was a German custom where young people would put on masks. It was almost like trick-or-treating. And then they would go around from house to house entertaining people in exchange for a little treat, like a cookie like this. So it was fun. And then the other thing I like to mention is you can see the shapes of the cookies on the left are animals, and that was very popular associated with Christmas. Not only did you have, traditional Christmas things like stars, Santa, all the ones that we know today, but they liked to do have cutouts of whether they were farm animals or domesticated or even wild animals. So you would see a lot of those tin cookie cutters. And now spice cookies. So many of the earliest cookies associated with Christmas were a form of gingerbread, such as German Lebkuchen, gingerbread men, as you can see here. And depending on what region of Europe people came from, that depended on what spices they like to use in their cookies. There was a number of them, from nutmeg, allspice, cinnamon, ginger, but also some that we think of as more savory today, like caraway seeds, aniseed. Sometimes they'd even put a little dash of red or black pepper in there to kind of offset the sweetness. And some were sweetened with honey, others with molasses or brown sugar or something. And some were like is shown here. These are actually molasses cookies. They were soft and more cake-like, and then other kinds were more like ginger snaps. And so they were harder. And that comes from the Dutch word snappen, which means to seize quickly. So these, kind of snappy ginger snap cookies were popular too. And then sugar cookies, in general, cookies, in America, they were a special treat because sugar was very expensive, especially refined white sugar. But by the early 1800s, you started to see more large scale production of sugar. It was stored in these large cone shapes, and that's how sugar was shipped. Um, but then by the 1850s, the Boston Sugar Refinery introduced granulated sugar, and that really made it easier to ship and more accessible and available to people. Plus, they started refining sugar from beets, and that was much less expensive than doing it with sugar cane. And again, that really increased the affordability and availability of sugar. And now many, though, still contain brown sugar, which was lower in price and coarser grained. And it also it made baked goods that were softer, moister, and denser because it had more moisture in the actual sugar itself. But some people, prefer that. I actually love a brown sugar cookie. So I have both the brown sugar and the coffee cookies in the book. The coffee cookie recipe was one of the toughest for me to adapt. So I'm really thrilled that it finally turned out. It has some coffee in it, but yet some brown sugar too. It's a really delicious combination. And now also, brightly colored confections were often more appealing than plain ones. Just, like today, we like, things are brightly colored in a lot of ways. But back then, the artificial dyes they had were very risky. Some actually contained poisons in them. They could have arsenic, lead, copper, or zinc. So many people use safer alternatives from plant sources, and which would make a more pastel colored frosting like shown here, but they like that. And you could use things like saffron to make yellow, spinach for green, and then berries could make like a pink or reddish color. So there was plenty of options to do that, and I give some in the book if you wanted to try them, just to give it a whirl and just to see what happens when you try some of these natural sources. And now butter too, just like sugar was once a real luxury product. It was costly, it was quick to spoil, it was often preserved with salt. But by the 1860s, creameries began larger scale production of butter. And by the Gilded Age, the invention of the mechanical cream separator really made butter faster and cheaper to produce. And unsalted butter then became commercially available, and production really soared. And you start to see packaged butter by 1898. So it was much easier to buy in store. Plus, the railroads, were then moving goods all around the country at that point, and they had refrigerated rail cars by then too, which so that really helped make butter more available and accessible throughout, most of America. So you see, cookies like I have on the right, the shortbread was very popular, associated with Christmas. They actually would often bake it in this round shape like that and write somebody's name on it and then give it to them as a gift. So I think that's a really fun way to share your baking with somebody. I like those kind of homemade gifts like that. Now, this is actually a plum pudding in this picture, but I do want to talk about how in the beginning part of the Gilded Age, there were the types of cakes that dominated holiday tables were more like these fruity cakes. But by the late 19th century, you do start to see these lighter flour-based cakes that were more popular, and that's due to two innovations. And one of them is the rotary egg beater that was patented in 1863, which made whipping eggs faster and much easier. Because before that, you had to beat eggs by hand, which could take a very, very long time. And then the other thing was new leavening agents. So baking soda, baking powder, this is the time frame when they start to be, come into the baking scene, and it really revolutionized the process. And you could have tall, airy cakes with much less effort. Before that, beating the eggs by hand into a froth, like a foam, and that those air bubbles would make the cake rise. So that was a mechanical leavening versus the chemical leavening from the baking agents that I just mentioned. So it definitely was a time saver to have those in your baking repertoire. So, and now I want to talk about gem pans. So those are small muffin-like little cakes, and they were very popular in the 18th and 19th centuries. So you can see the baking pan in the back there. It's a black cast iron. And what you do is you oil it with either butter or some oil, and actually put it in your hot oven, and then wait a little bit, take it out, and then put the batter in. And then it really bakes so much faster. It puffs up almost like a popover. And they were, like I said, very popular at this time. They originated more as like a healthy kind of product. So Sylvester Graham, who graham crackers are come from, he kind of kicked it off in a lot of ways. But then by the Gilded Age, you see them like as more like these little cupcakes, and these have spices and chocolate in them with a really nice maple butter frosting. So they're delicious. And then Christmas cake. So this is kind of a combination of that fruity type of cake, because it does have some dried fruit in it, raisins, currant, and citron, mixed with like a floury mix of egg and butter and sugar and some baking agent, baking powder. So it's like that combination cake. I think this tastes like a coffee cake. It's delicious, but this was very popular at by the end of the Gilded Age. And even sometimes instead of baking it in a one pan, you can make them as little individual cakes too. And now chocolate, you start to see more and more chocolate cakes. So this is fascinating too. This is when chocolate as a cake flavor really came into its own. Pre-Gilded Age, most chocolate was consumed as a drinking beverage. It was, cacao beans are like oily in nature. So it was really tough to process and process them so that they could be integrated into baked goods. They figured out in the Gilded Age how to press that cocoa butter out of the cacao bean, and then you have this cocoa behind that you can mix in with things. You can make a smoother, more melting type of chocolate that we have today. So then you start to see them in many more cake recipes, puddings, pies, all kinds of things. So I wanted to include this fudgy chocolate cake that I saw some recipes for. It's actually kind of a combination of a few different recipes, and it's really, really delicious. So it has like a fudgy kind of creamy center. And now, so pies and puddings, you know, most of the Gilded Age holiday menus that I saw had two items for dessert, and that was the plum pudding and mincemeat pies. Some menus had only those two things. for the dessert section. So that they were just on every holiday table. And pies and puddings in general started out more savory, with meat in them, and almost more of like a pottage or like porridge kind of consistency. And then over time, you start to see them baked in these pudding kind of shapes. And that's the same for plum pudding and mince pie too. They both had meat in them, with a lot of dried fruit, and eventually they both got sweeter over time. And you see, all kinds of other ingredients added to them. And um, so mince pie the one that I included in my cookbook is actually a mock mincemeat pie, so it doesn't have any meat in it. But at this time frame, they definitely would have had pies with meat in them, and it was a very long time consuming process to boil this. They had to boil the meat, and then it wasn't like being able to open up a package of sun-made raisins today to get the dried fruit in your mixture, because they would come in these packages, but there could still be maybe some sediment in there, dirt, even bugs, and you had to wash all that out and boil the meat and then mix it all up and let it meld together for a long time. So it was a very long time consuming process. I often say there's so much we take for granted today that we can just open something up and it comes together. So this was a very popular holiday item to have, absolutely, and baked in this rich pastry crust. Now, plum pudding, again, this was the highlight of the holiday feast, brought to America by British colonists, and especially this plum pudding, which was also often called Christmas pudding. I mean, every family had it, even if you didn't have a lot of money. You see it on the poor Cratchit family in A Dickens Christmas Carol even had their Christmas pudding. So traditionally, it would be served with rum or brandy butter, which was the hard sauce on top. This is just showing it, before you add that. And then the ingredients, ironically, there aren't any plums in plum pudding. They were dried plums or prunes. And that was commonly used in medieval times. But then later, when other fruits, such as raisins and currants, were introduced into England, those were eventually substituted or just added in there as well. And that plum pudding name stuck. And eventually, the meat that was in there was replaced by suet, which is the protective fat around the kidneys of beef or mutton. And any of the vegetables they would have put in originally were phased out. So then you start to see and it gets sweeter. You have all these dried fruits, maybe some eggs, even breadcrumbs to thicken it. They'd often put in some kind of liqueur to help keep it preserved. So a lot of different ingredients and so many recipes. They all have kind of a different spin on it. And now stir up Sunday. So this really evolved. I mentioned how plum pudding was like a pottage originally. Then it kind of evolved to this boiled pudding with a round shape because they had pudding cloths, and they could put all the ingredients inside that and hang it up over an open fire. And it would really, it would cook at the same time you were maybe making a stew or something. And then eventually they had tin. So you see this molded pudding version, which is the one that we commonly think of today. And fun fact, it really does have to steam. So I have two different molds that I actually just put in my crock pot. So I put a little bit of water on the bottom, put the mold in there with a little foil over it, and then I just let it go for 3.5 to 4 hours, and it's done. It's perfect. You could also do it in your oven if you just put a little water in the bottom of your, like a water bath, or in a stock pot. But it really does have to steam. That's how it's traditionally made. And again, you would put that topping on there. I'll talk about that a little more in a minute. But before you actually bake it, they have Stir Up Sunday, which actually was yesterday, technically, because it's the last Sunday before Advent. And families would go to church and then they would come home and gather around the table to mix up the plum pudding. So every family member from the oldest to youngest would take a turn stirring the pudding clockwise while making a wish. So, you pick what you wanted to wish for. You didn't tell anybody. Sometimes they would put charms in there. So, on Christmas Day, when you got your slice, if you maybe got a ring in your slice, that meant you were getting married. If you got a thimble, it might mean you were going to be a spinster. So you had to be careful what charm you got, I guess. But after it was all stirred up, it was left to mature till Christmas Day. So they would hang it up somewhere in a nice, cool place. And then Christmas Day, they would boil it and then have it for Christmas dinner. And here you have a picture presenting it, and it is lit up here, as you can see. That brandy butter would help really keep things flaming, and they would put a sprig of holly on top, and then you have it to kind of close out your celebratory meal there like that. And now I'm going to talk about some candies and other confections because they really did like these bite-sized, little decorative treats. And with, like I said, chocolate becoming much easier to process, you started to see things like bonbons, as shown in this picture. And then companies like Cadbury, Nestle, and Hershey really led the way about, different chocolate candies. You also had nougat, which was imported and then adapted in the US. That was another favorite. And then surprisingly, there were treats that I now associate with summer, such as ice cream, popcorn, and candied apples. Those were all associated with Christmas too at the time. And I actually have a recipe for popcorn balls in there and an ice cream recipe too. Um, but lemon drops, they're technically a meringue cookie, but I include them with the candies and confections because they're just so sweet and petite and just, delightful to have alongside your hot chocolate or coffee or something. But they come from meringue, which really dates back to the 16th century when they whipped eggs whites into a froth with, believe it or not, a wooden twig. They didn't have any other better utensil. And then they called that snow, that frothy mixture. And then they realized if you just leave it out to dry or bake it at a very low temperature, it changed the texture to one that's pleasantly airy and crispy. And that's how you get meringue. And so it was really incorporated in a lot of Gilded Age recipes, either as a topping to like a custard or then as a cookie like this, all different flavors. And I included lemon in my book because I saw them pop up on a lot of holiday menus. And now sugar plums. Finally, we get to sugar plums, right? They actually date back to the 1600s too. And they started out as small, round or oval treats made out of colored or boiled sugar. And they were about the size and shape of a plum. So they are not sugar dusted plums as we might think. They often also maybe had a seed in the center. So like an aniseed or caraway seed. But by the Gilded Age, they started making them out of a combination of finely chopped up fruits and nuts. So that's the version that I have in the cookbook. They were typically served at the end of the meal with fruit and nuts, and you dust them in confectioner sugar. And you can actually package them up, like shown in the back here, and hang them on the tree or give them as gifts or just have them as decorations around the house. They're just really a delightful little treat. I don't know why they kind of went away or fell out of favor, but yeah, if you want to try to make them and have them make a comeback, that would be fun. Oops. And then the next one is chocolate. Here we go with chocolate again. So, as I mentioned before, hot chocolate and hot cocoa were both very popular in the Gilded Age, but they were distinctly different. So, hot cocoa was much lighter in color. Think of it more as like the Swiss Miss that we have now. Hot chocolate was very thick, rich drinking chocolate. And they often had these hot chocolate sets that you would use to serve it. This one's actually my mom's, and it's Limoges. It's just beautiful, and you can see in the middle is that sugar bowl. It's huge. You could add as much sugar as you wanted to. But they made it thick and rich by just literally putting shavings of chocolate with a lot of milk or cream and even eggs, egg yolks, sugar, and it was just this delightfully warming beverage. And then during the Gilded Age, if you were a man and had a long, luxuriant mustache, you could have a mustache cup. And as you can see, you could rest your mouth there and your mustache would not get in your hot chocolate or whatever other hot beverage. So it's very ingenious to let them have their beverages and not worry about that. And now I also like to talk about, so Gilded Age was the time frame when Hanukkah celebrations in America really became more widespread in the Jewish community. And that was alongside the growth of these more festive and commercial Christmas celebrations. So, the Jewish community saw Christians celebrating Christmas and wanted to also partake of some of this December merriment. So, since Hanukkah was the holiday that occurred around the same time of year, it was a natural fit. And you had this Abram Isaacs. He was an American rabbi and professor, and he wrote in an 1889 issue of the Jewish Messenger that he really wanted to share the larger meaning. That men and women were celebrating through Christmas bounty, cheer, and brighten mankind. So he was encouraging the Jewish community to also celebrate and kind of spread this cheer throughout their communities as well. And now, as far as food, the main foods that I could find associated with it were sufganiyot, which are the jelly donuts, and latkes, potato pancakes. Both are fried in oil. It symbolized the small amount of oil that miraculously lasted for 8 days when the Maccabees rededicated the ancient temple in Jerusalem. So that was, associated with the religious celebration. And then by 1903, Yiddish newspapers marketed food gifts such as fruit to accompany these latkes. And then different Jewish congregations would have ice cream kind of festivals for the children at the same time of year. And now New Year's has to be talked about as well, because this is like the ending chapter of the book. And it was a very festive holiday, just like today, both New Year's Eve and New Year's Day celebration. So if anyone's from the Philadelphia area, you may have heard of the mummers. So they actually originated in the Gilded Age. Men would just walk around firing off gunshots, cannons, bells, making a lot of noise. And even though residents wanted to curb it, they just wouldn't stop. And so finally, the city organized the first Mummers Parade in 1901, and it continues to be a really major event. New York City, there were plenty of hotels and restaurants that had popular New Year's Eve dinners. Some are the Hotel Knickerbocker, Maxim's restaurant. They even had people dressing up as Father Time and the Baby New Year, kind of, the different themes of the evening. They had all kinds of events, like different fancy dress. They even did comic, kind of shows. And Chicago was another city that really celebrated in style. So they also, if you look through their newspapers, they had plenty of different celebrations with a lot of champagne, noisemakers, the same kind of thing that we do today. And then in New York City, they had, it's called New Year's Calling. And this is an old Dutch tradition. It dates back to the 17th century. So on January 1st, families would open their houses to family, friends, and even people they might not know as well. It was like a huge open house. You would go from door to door, the men making social calls to exchange well wishes, kind of renew friendships. Like if you had fallen off with somebody, this is a chance. It was just almost like a New Year's resolution. Let's start the year fresh kind of thing. And then the women would put out cakes and cookies, even elaborate dishes like truffled fowl, oysters, fruitcake. They also had drinks like cherry bounce, sherry, Madeira, eggnog. So you can imagine that the celebrations could grow rowdy with the young men rushing from house to house, doing their greetings and then moving on. So there's definitely references to that, like, towards the end of the day, a little bit of rowdiness there. And so a lot of times they would serve these New Year's cookies. They're also called New York cookies. And you can kind of see in this picture they have caraway seeds in them. But they're a brilliant combination of both sweet and savory. They're delicious, and they loved these kind of shapes, these geometric shapes. Sometimes they would stamp them out, like, have like these wooden molds to stamp them out too. So they're just a really delicious, and I don't know why they went away either, actually. Um, Now macaroons are still around, and they're one of the oldest known cookies. Originally made using finely chopped almonds with sugar and egg whites, like a marzipan. They had also all kinds of versions with coffee in them, vanilla, lemon, orange, even chocolate. And they were featured on many New Year's Day luncheon and dinner menus in the Gilded Age. So that's why I wanted to include them. Oops. And now ice cream. This is actually my favorite recipe in the whole book, ginger ice cream. I love ginger. I love ice cream. And making ice cream at home became a lot easier in 1843 because American Nancy Johnson invented the ice cream maker for home use. So you start to see it crop up a lot more in cookbooks. Before that, you had to enjoy it at an ice cream parlor, or even they called them a saloon sometimes. So you start to see many more home recipes for ice cream. And this one was adapted from an 1891 cookbook, Palatable Dishes, A Practical Guide to Good Living. You see it show up on New Year's menus, and ginger in general was a popular ice cream flavor during the holidays, because of that, like ginger cookies and that kind of thing. So this has a triple play of ginger preserves, crystallized ginger, and then ground ginger. And it's just really a delicious combination of taste and flavors. And now chocolate wine. This is my last reference to chocolate here. But again, you see it as a drinking beverage. And this actually dates back to the colonial era, even served at Mount Vernon by Washington and his guest. But it continued to be a popular drink through the 19th century. And they used sherry or port, some kind of fortified wine, along with grated chocolate, sugar, cornstarch, or flour. And so it's just those four ingredients, and you boil it all together, and it creates this really thick, rich, heated beverage. I actually did this week on a couple of cooking shows, and it was so much fun, and everyone loved it because it really is. It's delicious combination. It's rich, thick, and you don't drink it overly hot, but it's so good. And I found out it's delicious over ice cream too. Like if you want a little topping for your ice cream, it's really good. Um, and then also, I have to mention Ward McAllister. Anyone who knows Gilded Age, watches the show, or just knows it in general, he and Caroline Astor were the ringleaders there of the 400, the group of people that they said, those are the only people that can come to all the parties. And so he had a grand ball in 1888. It was a New Year's ball at Delmonico's. And he had 100 gentlemen subscribers, each pay him $50, and then they got 7 invitations in return. So there's like 700 people at this event. And he says that it surpassed all of his previous events. It had decorations, cotillion dances, a supper with delicacies like canvasback duck, paired with all 4 different kinds of champagne. So it was just so extravagant. They didn't eat dinner till like midnight, just crazy over the top kind of stuff. And then last, I like to say Newport. Newport, we always think as the place where all the Gilded Age folks would go in the summertime, and they did. They loved, Newport in the summer. It was cooler. They loved the breezes and all of that. But it was also the scene of many New Year's balls. So you see it decorated with, wintry themes and greenery and all kinds of things, Christmas trees. In 1890, this one held by William R. Hunter, he was a real estate businessman. It was in Newport's Masonic Hall. It was so decorated. They actually had one corner was a nook with tapestries, furniture, and soft lighting. Um, in a separate part, there was the dining section, and it was closed off by curtains. And then at 10 o'clock, they opened it all up. So they just really went all out with all of these different balls and just all kinds of themes that they had throughout the Gilded Age. So to me, that's the biggest takeaway here is, again, all the different extravagance, but also the innovation and technology that really came about during this era. And think about that the next time when you're just trying to put together your Christmas desserts or Christmas cookies or whatever, and you're like, oh, I can just put in this baking powder. It's going to be easier, everything today with our stand mixers and all of that. So, it's just so much different. They would have loved to have all that technology, I'm sure, too, at their fingertips. So that's the end of my presentation. My social media handles, I try to be really good about posting, but it definitely is a full-time job in itself to do that. So I welcome anyone to just reach out, drop me a line. I always like chatting with people, so please do that. I have a weekly, or I'm sorry, a monthly newsletter if you want to sign up for that too. And I'm happy to take questions if you want to read them off to me, Mina, or should I just go through or?
No, no, I can. Do you want to take your slides down though so we can
Sure.
chat? Okay.
Yep, absolutely.
Excellent.
Here we go.
I've also opened up the chat so people can chat with each other as we go through the questions.
Okay.
I want to remind you that Q&A is where you need to put your questions because the chat sometimes it's hard to follow for that. First question. First of all, I love this presentation, Becky. I didn't know quite what to expect, but I was not expecting to just fall in love with everything Gilded Age. So thank you. So the first question is that there's an assumption that we're talking about the upper crust of the Gilded Age families, the wealthier. How would celebrations for the average American differ, do you think?
Yeah, I know it's funny. I think one of the reasons I really love history and food history in general, believe it or not, can date back to Laura Ingalls. I know that might sound funny, but Laura Ingalls Wilder, I loved her books as a kid, and I love the way she writes about food. So I always think about that. Like, how was the Ingalls family celebrating their? It was the same time as the Gilded Age. Like, you had people out on the frontier that had nothing that these Gilded Age people did. So that's how you have to think about that. Like, there were plenty of people that were lucky to put food on the table. Or Laura talks about she and Mary got like a peppermint stick in their stocking and they were thrilled.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, there were definitely differences in the cities, people living in tenements and things like that. I honestly don't know a huge amount about how their celebrations would have been, but definitely not on the level of the Gilded Age folks.
Mm-hmm. Plus, you had said that they might have loved the technology, but people that had a lot of money had plenty of servants to do all of the work. So it wasn't like they were in the kitchen,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. Yeah, not at all. They might go to the kitchen just so they could tell the servants what to do and plan. And you see that on the Gilded Age TV show. Bertha goes down there. This is what I want on my menu. And that's it. I mean, they're not
Mhm.
getting their hands dirty,
No.
so.
Quick comment from Judy. Stir up Sunday's Charms sounds like king cake hidden plastic babies in New Orleans for Mardi Gras. I wonder
Yeah.
if that's where the idea came from.
Yeah, I don't know how I know what she's talking about. And because, yeah, and 12th Night Cake, which is just like King's Cake, has the same thing. Or you put in a bean, a pea, and a clove to be a king, queen, and jester on on your 12th night celebrations. So I don't know if I'm sure it has similarities there, together. Because, yeah, both of those you put in something which you have to be careful not to bite, break your tooth on it.
Yeah, that's
So yeah.
true. Polly says my mother used pitted dates with a walnut piece or almond stuffed inside, rolled in confectioner sugar, and called them sugar plums. Is that close enough to deserve the name?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that idea. And I love the fact that there was a nut in the center because that's what I was saying. Originally, there was a seed in the center. So yeah, that's totally, I love that. In fact, if she wants to send me that recipe, I'd love to see it. That's fascinating. So,
Okay,
yeah.
Polly, you heard her. Follow her on social media. Shirley asks, do you think you can make ginger ice cream without an ice cream maker?
Yeah, I mean, you just have to have a really frozen, make sure you have a bowl that you put in the freezer so that it's really cold. Because that's the thing is you're adding these ingredients and that has to freeze up somehow. So what you can do, I think, if you don't have one, make sure that bowl's really cold, put the ingredients in, stir it a lot, put it back in the freezer, and then you might have to take it out a few more times and really stir it up until it's, the consistency you want it. So it'll work. It just, the ice cream maker just, again, is quicker. That's all. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
I saw this thing years ago where they had a soccer ball, but it was an ice cream maker. So they
Yes.
put the cream in the inside, then ice on the outside and salt, and then the outside was the soccer ball, and the kids played with it, and then they made ice cream.
We had one of those for my son. Yeah, we in fact we still have it somewhere. Yeah, it was fun. He loved doing that. Yeah. So that's the thing. It just needs to be really cold and the salt helps mix it up too. But an ice cream maker just makes it faster, that's all.
Hmm. Cindy says, I think of macaroons as having coconut as the main ingredient. So are almonds and citrus the beginnings of those cookies, or is this just a different take on it?
Yeah, they were the beginning part. Like almond was a big flavoring too, or almonds in general, dating back, even, pre-colonial times.
Mhm.
And then I feel like coconut's a newer thing to associate with macaroons. Yeah.
Mhm. Pat asks, what are the four ingredients for the chocolate wine? It sounds like Pat's going to be making this soon.
Yeah. So it's 2 cups of sherry, just one package of baking chocolate, so that 4 ounces, and I use the unsweetened, like the Ghirardelli or something, and then a cup of sugar and a half tablespoon of cornstarch. And honestly, you can put it all together in a pot at once, and then just start it off low so till the chocolate melts, and then it has to come to a boil so it can thicken up, and just let it go for a little bit till it's thickened and then take it off the burner because you
Mhm.
just you just don't want it to burn, that's all. But it's really easy,
Mhm.
so, and
I feel like
delicious.
I feel like I have all those ingredients in my pantry right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, and you could
So,
use any wine if you didn't have sherry. I don't know. It just it's a delicious combination. I really, and you don't even need like a fancy bottle of sherry. You know what I mean? Which is good too. So, yeah.
mhm. How accurate do you think the TV show is, The Gilded Age, to the how people actually lived then?
I think they're doing a really good job
Hmm.
depicting everything, and I like that they're showing different sides of it, like the downstairs part, and like I said, the black society, and they're had their own things going on, and the aristocracy there, and I like the fact that they're showing all different things like that. Now, in terms of food, um, they don't really show that much of it, but what I have seen, it seems to be really spot on with everything that I've researched too. So I do think they're doing a great job with all of that.
I would ask somebody the same question about Downton Abbey.
Yeah, I know. I don't
Not
know
sure.
as much about that, but yeah, I mean, I do think from my research there it's pretty accurate as much as it can be.
Hmm. What was the Emily Winston? What was the flavor profile for the original mincemeat pie?
Yeah, so it would have been beef, like boiled beef,
Hmm.
and definitely dried fruits, whatever sugar or sweetener that they had, probably not nearly as much as we're putting in now. And
Hmm.
then some kind of liqueur would go in there, probably, and maybe even some vegetables in the really early versions of it. And when I
Hmm.
say that, it would probably just be like carrots. And everything was minced up really fine. So it wasn't like you were seeing huge, bites of anything.
Hmm.
Maybe molasses eventually, would be in there. So, yeah.
Hmm.
Oh, venison, somebody said. Yeah, I can see that. Absolutely.
I mean, then, they really ate all kinds of animals that we don't really touch now in the US. Uh,
Right.
M-
Exactly.
Mary asks, and that notices that you have two Gilded Age Cookbooks. Is the one that's not about Christmas? Is it like just like regular daily
Yeah,
foods?
so that one has just different, it's 5 different chapters of different like types of settings. Like I talk about the innovations, then I talk about outdoor eats, then I have dinner parties and things like that. And then also going out because that was the rise of the restaurant industry too. And then I have a whole holiday section for that too. So yeah.
Mhm.
So there's
Um,
savory stuff in there in addition to sweet stuff. So
mhm, which makes it delicious.
yeah.
Teresa wants to know if many of these recipes have tree nuts. Do you know if these folks ever had diagnoses of allergies to tree nuts, as so many people do today?
And that's a great question. I've never seen that in any of my research, like anyone having an allergy. So yeah, and that's a great point. They had a lot more nuts in recipes back then. So I don't know what it is today, why there's so many more nut allergies. I don't know. So,
There's a lot of thoughts around it, but people didn't really pay attention to it back then, right? Like they were just like, oh, I broke out a little bit, I'll have some more nuts.
right, right.
They
Yeah, I'm
didn't
sure
avoid
it
it.
just, right. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. What was your favorite part of writing these books?
Wow, I love the history.
Hmm.
I love the history behind things and just knowing why something came about, how it evolved, the importance of that, what we can learn from it. So that's my favorite part, like all the sidebars and the recipe headers. And also I loved sharing, there's a few family recipes in there that have been in my family for a long time. So and also many of the props that you'll see in the photographs were from my family too. And that
Oh,
makes, I know my mother is so thrilled to see that. And she's like, your grandmother would have been so happy to see this, because they just date back from all that time. And I always say to people, like, a lot of people have some of these heirloom things. Bring them out and enjoy them, share them with people because they're just sitting in your cabinets, and why not use them and enjoy them?
hmm, absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to get last thing about the sugar plums. Is it similar
Hmm.
to the applets and cotlets that we have today? Alice asked that question.
Applets, what I'm not sure if I know what they are.
I think
Can
of
you
that
spell that?
Aplets and
Hmm.
cotlets. I don't know. I'm thinking like the apple thing that you get from McDonald's, which is totally not true.
Okay. Yeah,
But
I
I don't
don't
know.
know. I'm not
Yeah,
sure. I, I know
nuts.
that they're like a cutlet is like a little medallion of meat, so it's probably a similar thing where it's just like a little kind of I don't know, or what are they, like little like we say cutlets now, but they're not like yeah, I
No,
don't
she says
know.
it's nuts and gel.
Okay. Hmm.
Oh,
Oh, a
Turkish
jelly
delight.
candy.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
think so. They just don't have that like gelatinous consistency, the sugar plums, because I mean the ones I make anyway, because they're literally just so the sugar plums too are easy because they're just 2 cups each of apricots, dates, figs, and then walnuts. But you could use any dried fruit really that you like, and then two 2 tablespoons of brandy. Again, they like the liqueur. But if you want to make them for kids, you could just use apple juice or
Mm-hmm.
something, and then the confectioner sugar. So they're really easy
Hmm.
to make. So
Well,
yeah.
it's
So
easy for
apple,
us, as you said. My
yeah,
husband back then. And
yeah.
we're about out of time, but I remember hearing you saying that you were going to have a third book in the series coming out, hopefully at some point.
Yeah, so I do want to write a tea, like a Gilded Age tea book eventually, but I have a couple other projects in the works. One, my next project is actually going to be a book of Edith Wharton's recipes. I'm partnering with somebody who has access to that, and yeah, so stay tuned for more about that. And actually, I'm already scheduled to do a talk at the Mount next summer.
Hmm.
So I need to get on it with that research, but
Well,
before that, I'm also writing a book do soon a history of the City Tavern restaurant, which was in Philadelphia and very integral to the revolution and that whole colonial time frame. And that's really tying in with next year's being the 250th
Hmm.
anniversary of the US. So I'm that's gonna come first. And that'll be more like my first two books.
Okay.
So but yeah, then this other I like doing these cookbook combination history books because I feel like it touches on so many different things and people have different interests that it just has a wider kind of interest level. So
So Edith Wharton wrote Ethan Frome, which I have thoughts and feelings about, which I won't go into right now, but I will look forward towards the book. And I would love for you to come back maybe when you do the tea book and we can
sure.
just do sort of an all around, Gilded Age kind of
Yeah,
conversation. So
absolutely. Yeah.
awesome.
I would love that. And I appreciate everyone's comment. I know I can't read all the comments. Is there any way to save the chat so I could
Yeah, I'll
read?
send
Because
it
I
to you.
can't, yeah, because it's just nice to see what people's different thoughts are and everything. So
Yeah, I'll definitely send it to you afterwards, and I will be in touch with everybody with the recording link and some other information. But thank you so much, Becky, for doing this, especially the week
sure.
before of Thanksgiving. It's just so
Yeah,
perfect.
no, yeah, that's it's totally fine. It's just a hectic. I have a very short window to promote this
Mhm.
because after Christmas, until next year. So it's this kind of a whirlwind right now, but it's fine. I love talking about this stuff, so
You can tell, and we've loved hearing about it. So thank you again, and have a wonderful Thanksgiving. And for everybody here, happy Turkey Day or whatever you eat, tofurkey, pizza, whatever.
yeah.
Have a
All right.
wonderful night, everybody.
Take care. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.